I'm Juninho.
Samba boys, we used to call them, didn't we?
He is without doubt the greatest player to pull on a red and white shirt.
You need the real quality to stay in the Premiership. And I just saw these two Brazilians who I thought, wow. And it was Juninho and Roberto Carlos.
This really is an earth-shattering moment. A relatively small club in the Premier League can attract Brazil's number 10.
There was 5,000 people waiting for me, so the reception was fantastic.
We had to use a special microphone because it was so noisy.
I felt home since I first came.
He took on the Teesside way of life.
It was a joy to work with.
My relationship with the club is really special. That's why they still in my heart forever.
The Transporter Bridge is Middlesbrough's most famous landmark, but that could all change if Brian Robson gets his way. This is the Cellnet Riverside Stadium. Robson wants to turn this into Teesside's version of the Theatre of Dreams. If you think the hard hat and the bib is a little over the top, well, it's compulsory wear because outside it's still a building site.
The big debate was, should we have moved out of Ayresome Park or should we have stayed at Ayresome Park and developed the ground? I was very much in favour of staying at Ayresome Park. I love tradition, but when we walked in and we looked at it, it was like instantly, yes, Steve Gibson, you've made exactly the right decision.
It's not bad.
The Riverside at the time just seemed to match the ambition of what he was trying to do on the field.
It's a race against time to get the new ground ready for the first home game next weekend, but there's a real mood of optimism on Teesside. 18,000 season tickets have already been sold. That's nearly twice the previous record.
New stadium. Manager's only been there a year. What else do you want?
Give Newcastle something to worry about.
It's been the longest close season I can ever remember.
You're that excited?
It's brilliant.
And if anyone can make Borough a dominant force again, then it's Brian Robson.
People are talking about survival, and I'm trying to get across to our lads. There's no reason why they should talk like that. I don't think I'm asking for anything for them to be, you know, maybe mid-table, even fighting for a place for Europe.
The perfect scenario for Steve and the club, and for myself. It all fell into place really well.
Clap. Yeah. Robbo's first year was the last year at Ayresome Park. We get promotion into the Premier League. Then we're looking towards the Riverside Stadium. We're going to a new ground.
Please, before we just start, would you do one clap, please? Thank you very much.
You don't realise how massively important it was to get promotion that season, the new stadium coming and everything. You could tell by the signings that Brian was making and the backing he was getting from the chairman. It was going to be a hell of a season.
I remember when I first went to the borough, it was 1990, we couldn't even get a cup of tea out of Keith Lamb, the chief exec. We had to bring our own tea bags and biscuits in after training and everything. So when Robbo came in, that was the thing that kick-started the club to go into a different planet as such.
I said to Steve, look, we're going to have to spend a bit more money now because we need the real quality to stay in the Premiership, which Steve was all up for. That's why he built the new stadium and that. And so the first one who I really paid for was Nick Barmby from Tottenham.
Middlesbrough, they're a very ambitious club. Brian Robson, he'll make me into a better player, I'm sure of that.
When I spoke to Brian Robson, he set out the plan, and especially moving to the Riverside, which was a stunning stadium. Everything was sort of building momentum at Middlesbrough, and he's saying about. So the club was in a good foundation, really.
Juninho is from the city of São Paulo. At this point in the early 90s, São Paulo are for a while probably the best club in the world. They win the Copa Libertadores, South America's Champions League. They go off and they beat Barcelona at the end of '92 in Japan in that Intercontinental Trophy, the old World Club Cup. So it's a very, very good lineup. and he gets into first team contention perhaps just as they're on the way down. Brazil win the World Cup in 1994. But it's on penalties. It's not the most brilliant of their 5 World Cup wins. They feel that there's a need to have a number 10 figure, that figure, that creative midfielder who links the midfield with the attack. They feel that that's been missing from the side that's just won the World Cup. So there's this search that goes on. We need a number 10 figure. And this is happening just as Juninho is having his chance in the Sao Paulo first team. The original Ronaldo has already moved to Holland. So suddenly, just in the course of a few months, Juninho has become the most important player in domestic Brazilian football. And the game that changes his life is the game at Wembley.
When I went under Terry Venables and was assistant manager with England, we had the Umbro Cup. A guy called Ted Buxton, I used to go scouting all the games. It was Sweden, Japan, Brazil and ourselves. Obviously England played against everybody. And I just saw these 2 Brazilians who I thought, wow, both of them young lads, 19. And it was Juninho and Roberto Carlos.
He has a wonderful game. It puts him in the global spotlight just at the time when English football is starting, just taking the first steps towards becoming this global powerhouse. Remember, he's Brazil's number 10. Well, that's a magical thing in football. The number 10 Brazil shirt. And that really puts him in the shop window. But I don't think anyone was prepared for what happened next.
Knew we'd have to score more goals to stay in the Premiership. I mentioned to Steve I'd seen 2 really good young players and that would there be any chance of sort of making it work, which Steve was all up for, along with Keith Lamb, the chief exec, who I don't think he was up for it so much because I was going to pay $5 million for Juninho. Keith thought it was a real gamble for a young person. But Keith's job really was to get him his work permit, which was quite difficult at the time. But Juninho had played the amount of games to actually qualify it. But even then, we had to go to an appeals.
I wasn't in the performance of player that could go to England, so I need to get more involved in the national team to get the work permit.
Myself and Keith went down to Sao Paulo for 5 days. At Sao Paulo, they had like an amateur club which was connected to the football club. And so they had athletic people, they had boxing, and so they had all sorts of sport. We had to go into a room and there's about 20 people around the desk who all have an opinion whether they should sell them. But then they take us away and now we'd go into this little room that had black coffee for fun over there. And so me and Keith are sitting there for hours on end in this little room, drinking black coffee. But after sort of the 3rd day, they were coming round and they actually allowed us to go and speak to Juninho and his dad. I phoned Steve and I just said, look, Steve, we've got to pay $5 million. I says, but the deal can be done. And Steve just went, no, if you think it's right, Brian, just sign him.
They came and they showed me all the ambition of his plan with the club. In that time was other clubs, they said was other club interested to buy me from England, but no one came and really talked to the club, talked to me to go. So I trust Brian Robson, I trust Middlesbrough, and then that's why I get involved.
I know the Italian team an interest in him because when we'd actually done the deal with Juninho, I said, what about Roberto Carlos? I says, any chance of you selling him? And they said, look, 1 week ago, Brian, we've sold him to Inter Milan for another $5 million. If I'd been a week earlier, I might have been able to sign Roberto Carlos with Juninho, because the 2 of them were like that. They were big mates. That was one that got away from me.
He goes to Middlesbrough, this provincial team that certainly Brazilians had never heard of before. So this really is an earth-shattering moment. It's an earth-shattering moment for the Premier League. A relatively small club in the Premier League can attract Brazil's number 10. And this sends a message all around the world. The Premier League is on the way to becoming the main attraction.
Brian Robson had been saying to us, listen, we're trying to get this young Brazilian. And we thought, well, we might go to bigger clubs, or indeed down to London, or one of the big cities. And but oh no, he opted for Teesside.
Juninho fever has gripped the place. The boy from Brazil has finally arrived. And for the first time in the flesh, we could see how slight he is, how small he is. For a moment, he looked as if he was about to turn his collar up against the cold. This is the wave that's about to take on the might of the Premiership.
When I arrived in Teesside, I saw a few porters in the airport. A Brazilian family that after we got in friendship. And then when I get in the stadium, was 5,000 people waiting for me, so the reception was fantastic.
A wonderful atmosphere, a samba beat and Latin dancing from a troupe who've travelled 5 miles down the road from Billingham. Brazil had come to Middlesbrough and we were going to celebrate come what may.
I really get the immediate welcome, so I felt home since I first came.
We were there covering it live, stopped playing the music on the radio. Middle of the day, forget it. Let's just cover this little Brazilian arriving on Teesside. We had to use a special microphone because it was so noisy, trying to talk live to the Teesside public.
Then Juninho came in, and then you're seeing all the Brazilian flags. It made a bit like a carnival atmosphere because the fans had took to him straight away.
We were preparing for a game at Old Trafford. It was Borough taking on Manchester United at Old Trafford. And we had live commentary to do the very next game after it had been announced. So I'm on the phone to Globo in Brazil, a TV and radio media business, trying to find somebody who spoke English who could tell me more information about Juninho, this little player from Sao Paulo. And the fans just couldn't get enough of it. They just soaked it up more and more and more.
It was a lot quieter in the press conference afterwards. Juninho, even at 22 and miles away from home, is a very confident young man.
He wants to try and be the best player in the world.
I think Juninho just wanted to be part of the Premiership and a new challenge, because the Brazilian mentality, what I heard of from that time, was unless you make it in Europe and you prove yourself in Europe, then you're a top player. And I think Juninho had that in his mind.
Just amazing with people walking through the door, different nationalities. Such a good experience. You're starting to sign world-class players.
Can I ask one more question? Does he know how cold it gets in Middlesbrough in January?
Acho que deve ser frio monstruoso. Ainda não senti esse frio.
He doesn't think that in England could be that terrible.
When I arrived in England, was winter, really cold winter. It's totally different from Brazil, the weather, the food, the way that they play. So I had a little bit time to adapt.
It's been a gentle introduction so far for Juninho, nothing too strenuous in training as he tries to bridge the communication gap.
When I'm okay now, he's picking up words all the time.
Like goal.
Yeah, and you can see that he's wanting to work hard at picking up the language.
He couldn't speak the language, but he always had a smile on his face, and then straight away he's trying to communicate with his teammates.
And every morning I'll go in there and high five him and say, "Hey Juninho, come on pal, high five!" And he'd always have the big grin on his face and what have you, and he would speak, "Hey Johnny boy, hey!" and say something in Portuguese. And I thought, oh, I'm best mate and everything else. Sadly that wasn't the case, because years later I found out the word that he was using was quite, I can't say it on here, but
derogatory.
Very much derogatory. I mean, I spoke to him a few months ago and I hadn't spoken to him for years, and he came on the phone and the first thing he said was, "Hey!" and the two of us just burst out laughing and what have you. He got by, he did. He learned English very, very quickly. He was a clever lad.
You could see him working quite hard at that to make sure that he settled in. The lads were brilliant with him, and then the more the players got to know him over the first few months, they could see what a class player he was.
He came to the area, then moved into his house in Ingleby Barwick, where he'd get knocks on the door. Kids in the street wanted him to come out and play football. And Juninho would go out in the street and play football with the kids. Not for cameras, not for the press, nothing like that. He just integrated fully.
Settling in a foreign land is the biggest challenge facing any player moving to a new country. Juninho tackled that one by attempting to make a home from home.
He took on the Teesside way of life.
And he moved his whole family over.
He did, including his parents.
If the publicity ever goes to Juninho's head, there's always his mother to bring him back down to earth. Her favourite player of all time is Zico.
Is Juninho better than Zico?
Juninho é maior que Zico?
No.
No?
Ainda no.
So finally we were allowed to see him, Juninho, training with his new colleagues under the watchful eye of his new manager, and of course the complete array of press men and women.
Somebody said he scored in the practice match, is that right?
Yeah, I think it took about 2 minutes. I don't know whether the reserve lads will let him get his confidence, but no, he looked nice and bright in the game.
We never really had a permanent training ground.
We train on Ayrton Park. We would train at Kit Leamington Prison.
I think it was a big eye-opener for Juninho, where he's looking around thinking, you know, where there's doors locking.
It was strange, really, because they'd open the gates and we'd go in, and then you've got all the prisoners at certain time. They would be out and they'd be shouting Newcastle, Sunderland, Liverpool, all this sort of thing, and absolutely hammering us while we were training. Now and again, we had to go to parks, pitches.
We'd train at Hutton Road, where there's people out walking their dogs. You can imagine what your boots were covered in.
And all of a sudden, the dog goes running past you and everything. It was different, but, you know, most of the lads took on board what it was about, and you kept saying to them, look, these are the plans. This is what we're hoping to achieve.
The man himself appeared as relaxed as ever, and we were treated to a privileged few words.
Have you enjoyed it this week? Are you okay?
Gostou da semana, está tudo bem.
Very good. You scored a goal in training. You scored a goal.
Fez gol no treino.
Espero fazer no jogo também.
He hopes he scores in the game as well.
It took him a little bit of time to acclimatise, which you'd expect, being Brazilian and being freezing cold and new surroundings, new way of playing. But you could see he was special.
Juninho, he wasn't an intense trainer as such. You get his nice little touches and everything else. And particularly in the winter as well, the climate here, I mean, he'd be wrapped up in all the layers and everything else. He came to light on match day.
He knew he needed to work, and the game was so much quicker, and he knew he needed to get fitter. So he would stay every day after training, he would do pitch runs, and he would work his socks off.
Has the success given the town a feel-good factor?
It certainly has.
People just buying season tickets here?
Season tickets.
On the strength of Juninho?
Good luck.
The last 3 weeks he's done nothing but TV and media, you know, interviews. And I think the lad just wants to get back out onto a football pitch and start playing football.
Obviously the arrival of Juninho is going to be a cataclysmic occurrence up on Teesside. Everybody's going to want to see him. There's going to be a lot of hype about the game. It's almost like we're going to play in a final at Wembley.
There are literally thousands of fans queuing outside the Riverside Stadium. How long have you been waiting for?
2 hours.
2 hours? Waited for about 2 hours. Can you imagine the reaction when Juninho is finally introduced to them? Wow.
You didn't get a lot of English football on Brazilian TV, and it was kind of sneered at, it was kind of laughed at the time. But because it was his first game, they put this match on Brazilian TV, and they were going to a shopping centre to watch it.
Go to Brazil!
I called him the little fella because on Teesside, the word fella is used universally. It means man. It just naturally came in that first commentary we did where he was playing. It just naturally tripped off the tongue, and it stuck.
When Brian came to talk to me, he brought me a few games of Premier League. When I was watching the game, I saw really physical games, a lot of long balls, and I said, oh, they need to change the way to play, otherwise I'm not adapt to the English football. But when I first came in and when I started to play, I saw the game totally different. So I get the space to play. Most of the times I get the ball, I was free, so it was excellent.
A lot of people are telling him the style of football is not going to suit you. It's not going to be good for you. He found exactly the opposite. If you remember at the time, a lot of English teams were playing straight lines, 4-4-2, straight lines, and there was a lot of space in between the lines. Juninho had the intelligence to work out that he could move around on the field and he could find space.
I always more or less wanted to give him a free role so then he could get on the ball and do what he does best. He was just a natural talent. He had so much pace off the mark, great balance going either way with the ball.
He was brave, like really brave. Not only wanting the ball in all the areas, but people are going wire in and he'd just get up and he'd get on with it.
You'd see a tackle on him, you're thinking, wow, I don't think he's going to be fit for next week or whatever. But Juninho knock on you off his door after training and just go, no, I'm okay tomorrow. And that was the type of attitude he had to the game.
Such a skillful player, awareness all around him. It's just a buzz every day in training. And also players like that, other players look at that and then, you know, they go up another level.
But the abiding memory of that time was seeing Juninho on his haunches at Elland Road when we were relegated, and seeing Juninho down on his haunches in tears is an image that is almost burnt into my soul, because it's the realisation that this great player that we had to move on.
Bringing him into the Premiership was a little bit of a gamble because of his size. You don't have to be big all the time to be a top player.
When players come in as well, you're thinking, okay, it's what they like as individuals, what they like as characters. Because sometimes they'll be given it large and what have you. But certainly from day one, the little fella, everyone just adored him. And if you like that off the pitch, and you're special on the pitch as well, it's a recipe for success.
One of the presenters on the Red Radio, he named his son after Juninho, so he gave him a middle name of Juninho. To Middlesbrough fans, certainly of the last few decades, he is without doubt the greatest player to pull on a red and white shirt.
My relationship with the club is really special. I don't think I have any other relationship as I had with Middlesbrough. That's why they still in my heart forever.